I don't remember much from my childhood, but I remember the day that we picked up Star Wars on VHS from the video store. For whatever reason, I remember holding it in my hand even before I knew what it was and just being transfixed by the image on the front. Something about it just spoke to me. There was this sense of adventure in that image, and I still to this very day remember how it made me feel. Fast forward 30 years, and as I've grown older and come to think about having kids of my own, I've always had this sort of image in my mind. When I have kids, and when they're old enough, I want to sit them down and I want to show them Star Wars for the first time. And when this scene begins, I don't want to be watching the screen, I just want to be watching their face. Because I want to see what it's like the very first time my child sees their very first binary sunset. Star Wars isn't just a movie or a franchise or an IP or any other sort of bullshit corporate word. Disney may own the rights to Star Wars, but we all own what it means to us. It's the defining legend of our generation. It's the kind of story that cavemen would have etched onto walls or told around campfires to educate their youth about the difference between good and evil, the importance of family, bravery, courage, friendship, and belief in a higher power. It's the most resonant parable of the modern era, and it's for this reason that it continues to mean as much to us today as it did when we first saw the binary sunset as children ourselves. So when you mess with that, you had better be ready for people to fight back. And fight you they did, EA. Fight you they did.
Well, Electronic Arts. Well. Looks like you fucked up, didn't ya?
We shouldn't allow Star Wars to encourage your kids to gamble.
You're fucking whales over, and you're fucking the normal players over because you even have this system in the first place.
The backlash that EA has received on the back of the way they've structured their in-game progression systems, coupled with the inclusion of controversial loot boxes, has been unprecedented. Not since the Call of Duty Infinite Warfare reveal, or the sobering reality of No Man's Sky has the video game community reacted so ferociously. Only this time, I think it's worse. It's funny to circle jerk over Call of Duty, but we don't really care about it, because that's not really for us anymore. And it's disappointing that the No Man's Sky developer Hello Games clearly lied to us, but it's just a little indie game, and we'll get over it. But Star Wars is Star Wars, and that's where people draw the line. I made a decision when I chose to review Star Wars that I would put my desire to be professional and objective over my desire to mercilessly flay EA for what I believe is the worst, most exploitative AAA game ever released. If you'd like to see my unfiltered thoughts on that, I've posted a number of videos on my second channel, which I'll link in the description below, as well as another one recently titled the Wilson Lootbox, which I'll also link. But I'm a big believer in your right as a consumer to make an informed choice about this purchase, and I don't think that my personal prejudices should cloud my responsibility to give you the information you need to make a decision about whether or not this game is for you. Today I will speak about why I think the progression system in this game is flawed, both structurally and morally, but I'll also be talking about the many things that this game gets right. Because at its core, Star Wars Battlefront II is an excellent Star Wars game, and in fact, I would say that at times, it's one of the greatest Star Wars games ever made. And the greatness of this game only deepens the scale of this tragedy, because EA, through their approach to monetization, have overshadowed the incredible work of DICE. Star Wars Battlefront II is the kind of game I would have loved to have shared with the child I hope to one day have, because so often it creates these incredible Star Wars moments, and I would love to watch their face the first time they pilot an X-Wing, or take control of Luke. But instead, the stories we'll tell about this game as we sit around our own metaphorical campfires will be cautionary tales, those of a company who took something beautiful and ultimately made it ugly. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review of Star Wars Battlefront II. I remember one time I was living in China for 3 months when I was at university, and I remember chatting to a student there whose father worked for the Communist Party. And being curious, I asked her how she felt about the fact that it was a one-party system in China and that their media and internet were heavily censored. She replied that the way she and a number of others saw it, the system and order brought by the communist government, It was a necessity given the population of China, over 1.5 billion people. So basically said that the whole is greater than the individuals that comprise it. Now, I don't agree with this, but I do see the sense in it, and I've learned a lot from that conversation that I've continued to reflect on over the years. And when it comes to things like popular fiction, I've since been fascinated by the question, what would truly motivate an enemy besides the predictable, one-dimensional desire to be evil? What other motivations or beliefs might they have that would make their actions justifiable? I think if you start asking these questions about the enemies that you see in popular culture, it becomes pretty easy to separate the interesting and well-written antagonists from the lazy ones. When I heard that Star Wars Battlefront II was not only going to have a campaign, but that campaign would be canon and link up the events of Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens and be told from the perspective of the Empire, I basically lost my shit. It was a total nerd wish list checkathon that couldn't possibly fail because there were just too many things giving DICE and EA a head start on this one. And as I played through the opening missions, I felt like they were really doing it. I got a sense that this game was going to delve into why someone like Eidolon, the Imperial Commando and daughter of a high-ranking admiral, would serve the Empire. Surely not everyone in the Empire are evil, in inverted commas. Many of them would believe that the Empire is a force for good, and if anyone was going to try and prosecute this case, I felt like Eidolon would be that person. But god damn it if EA and DICE didn't manage to impossibly pull defeat from the jaws of victory on this one. The game starts off exactly how you want it to. It's tense, well-structured, well-written, and well-voice-acted stories that truly make you believe like you're going to see an Imperial story from an Imperial perspective at a time when the Empire was crumbling. But during the third mission, the game takes one of the laziest plot turns you could imagine, and Eidolon then joins the Rebel Alliance in a laughably bad change of heart. I remember when this happened that I literally ran out in front of the first group of enemies that I saw to test whether or not they'd start shooting me. I was convinced that I must have missed something in that cutscene and that I couldn't have switched sides during that because it was just so ludicrously inconsequential that there's no way the game could have pivoted like it did. But sure enough, I stepped down in front of the stormtroopers and they shot at me. I was officially a rebel at that point and I sunk into my seat disappointed. Any hope that we might have had that this was going to be anything other than a generic, seen-it-all-before story immediately was shattered. And it's such a shame. Now, I'd be willing to switch it to a more generic Rebel Alliance perspective story if it was well told, but from the third mission on, the narrative of the game completely spirals out of control. Its primary intention is to set up the reasons why you get to play this wide cast of characters, from Luke to Han to Leia to Lando to Kylo, and a whole bunch more. It really doesn't care how little plot it provides you to get to the point where you're in control of that character. That's not the objective. Honestly, the setup for most missions feels like porn quality storytelling, anxious to get the narrative out of the way so that you can get down to the good stuff.
I see you don't have a lifeguard here at your beach.
I'm not at the beach, this is a bathtub.
And the missions themselves are sort of like weird. They're almost like what a 12-year-old would imagine if you asked them to imagine a Star Wars adventure. Like, I want to play as Lando in a robot factory, and there's lava everywhere, and I'm in a robot, and Luke Skywalker, I want to be him now, and we're going to fight some bugs. For like 10 minutes. By the way, seriously, this segment went on for literally 10 minutes. It was ridiculous. And now I'm Kylo Ren, and I'm inside some guy's brain, and I'm killing the baddies to get their secrets. It's crazy, and I'm being silly, of course, but I'm really not exaggerating all that much. To me, the campaign story feels like what you'd expect from a fighting game campaign, where characters are introduced and thrust together in awkward ways just so that they are introduced and you can get down to the business of beating each other up. And I have to say that I enjoyed the Mortal Kombat campaign a hell of a lot more than I enjoyed the Star Wars Battlefront II campaign. But look, here's the thing. The story sucks, but the campaign, it's not terrible. It's just ridiculous Star Wars adventure after adventure starring your favorite characters in some of your favorite locations. The stealth mechanics don't really work, the gunplay is one-dimensional, but man, does it produce some truly incredible moments. I mean, you can 1v1 an entire space station. You can drive an AT-AT or an AT-ST. You can drive your TIE fighter into a loading dock and blow up everything you see. You can kill bugs as Luke Skywalker for like 10 minutes. You can pilot the Millennium Falcon in one of the most beautiful Star Wars settings you've ever seen, and you can first-hand see how the Battle of Jakku went down with Star Destroyers and Mon Calamari ships littering the evening sky. I certainly won't go as far as to say as the Star Wars campaign is good, but I will say that it's almost sure to bring a smile to your face at least once or twice. It's a short 4 to 5 hour romp that tugs at the heartstrings of our nostalgia while delivering some truly memorable Star Wars moments that will likely stay with you after you finish the campaign. We didn't get a story or anything close to what we've seen from the other Star Wars greats like KOTOR or Jedi Academy or even the excellent storytelling of the Old Republic, but we did get a few laughs with some of our favorite characters, and in my view, that's just enough to earn a passing grade. But there's one part of the game that straddles both the single player and the multiplayer, and it's an unmitigated triumph, and that's the space combat. So now let's take a deeper look at what EA have done here and how they've managed to produce one of the best Star Wars flight simulators since the glory days of the Nintendo 64.
This is a straight hit and run mission. Good luck.
There's an Imperial storage base nearby.
Many of you out there are going to remember this absolute masterpiece from Factor 5 Studios, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, released exclusively on the Nintendo 64 on the 3rd of December 1998. And man, it was just amazing. The visuals were cutting edge for their time, the worlds were perfectly realized, the combat was so tight and intimate and intense because they couldn't load a lot of assets at the time, so they had to make every single enemy count. I played this game and its sequels for hours. It remains to this day one of my favorite Star Wars experiences, and I will always have great affection for this game. But man, just look at this. The sheer spectacle of the scenes that you're seeing now come thick and fast during your time with Star Wars Battlefront 2, both in the campaign and the multiplayer. It's almost difficult to put into words how authentic a Star Wars experience these space battles are. To be honest, it's the most Star Wars I've felt since I was a kid. My favorite action scene in all of Star Wars is the space battle above Endor in Return of the Jedi, because it just has this visual presence that you can sink your eyes into and it just takes you away. Star Wars Battlefront 2 delivers the same sumptuous visual extravaganza whenever the hell you want, and what makes it even better is that it's actually a highly functional game as well. The depth starts with your choice of Starfighter, of which there are plenty, and they all have distinctive stats and handling that clearly differentiate them from one another. These aren't lazy reskins, there's work that's gone into each one of them both visually and mechanically. While some Starfighters are inherently better than other ones, I legitimately just enjoy switching between them and mixing them up because each of them feels so awesome. And with each of the different chassis also comes a different set of abilities. Each ship has its own core set of abilities like thrusters or astromech repair or homing missile or a whole bunch of other stuff, and you can actually customize this as well by swapping in different star cards, a system we will talk about in great detail very soon. While I don't like the underlying customization system, I do like the fact that I can customize them at all, something I really wasn't expecting I'd be able to do, given this sort of game mode and how arcadey it is. But the crowning achievement in all of this is the handling of these ships. I mean, my god, I have never played an arcade flight sim that felt this good. It is criminal how good these controls are. The way your ship barrel rolls and dives and climbs and weaves and gets in between tight spaces and outmaneuvers enemies, and all of it is just so incredible. Most of the time, I don't even care what I'm doing. I'm just flying around having fun since it feels so nice. You killed me? Sure, go ahead. I'm just having fun doing barrel rolls over here. And it doesn't hurt that the multiplayer game mode centered around these space battles is actually a pretty clever objective-based mode. It always involves one team shooting a bunch of specific targets while the other team trying to stop them. But this is just enough to carry the game mode over the line and make it a great mix of mindless arcade fun and play the objective style strategy that's always made the original Battlefront games so great. Don't get me wrong, much like the campaign, it's a fairly shallow game mode, and most of you will get bored of it fairly quickly, but there's a lot of people that I suspect won't. They'll keep Star Wars Battlefront II installed on their hard drives for the next few years, and once or twice a month they'll log in to play some Star Wars, and when they do, they'll play Starfighter Assault, and that's because the game mode is just so damn Star Wars. I really can't put it any other way. It's just so damn Star Wars, and I absolutely applaud the incredible work that the development team have put in here. Did you ever notice how Star Wars environment design is basically analogous to 3D platformer level design? You've got our sand worlds, our lava worlds, our ice worlds, our forest worlds, our space worlds, our city worlds, our water worlds, our sky worlds. I mean, it's like George Lucas thought to himself, I'm going to do every video game designer for the next 40 years a huge favor by ticking all of the boxes. You're welcome. The worlds in which the Star Wars saga unfolds are magnificent and endlessly memorable, so when a video game level designer sits down to design a Star Wars map, they have the best possible canvas to work with because it's already pretty much built for them. They just need to not screw it up. And here, DICE did not screw it up. The aesthetic level design of Star Wars Battlefront II is phenomenal. You will fight on the decks of Kamino's cloning facilities with its waves crashing violently around you, and then you'll head inside to its sleek Apple-esque halls to defend the final objective. You'll fall through section after section of hollowed-out Star Destroyer, resting on the sands of Jakku. You'll revisit old favourites like Hoth and Endor and Tatooine, and all of them are a wonderful, wonderful sight to just sink into. Much like the Starfighter Assault mode, you won't really care what's going on a lot of the time because you're just going to get enough satisfaction from just hanging out in these awesome environments and soaking it all in. And it's a good thing that you don't really care too much about what's going on because there really isn't all that much to speak of in terms of depth or complexity or even just the way the game works. You'll spawn with a squad of randomly assigned people as there's no squad systems such as in Battlefield games, though the developers do promise that this is coming later. There's no communication tools other than chat, so you can't really plan how you're going to approach your objective. And the level design, though really visually spectacular, often funnels you into choke points a la Metro or Operation Locker, so it really just becomes a sustained war of attrition until someone makes a silly mistake and the line is broken. There are different classes and vehicles for you to mess around with, and they each bring something distinct to the fight, but your ability to experiment with these different classes and the like is completely crippled by the progression system, which we're going to talk about in the next section of this video. The most frustrating design choice that the developers have made here, though, outside the loot box stuff, obviously, is the way they've managed heroes. You'll collect points as you play through each round, and when you earn enough, you'll eventually be able to play someone like Darth Maul or Yoda, and this is totally awesome. This is like the best thing ever. But in my whole time of playing this game, 20 hours plus or whatever, I've really only been able to do this a handful of times because the system only lets one of each hero on the battlefield at a time, which is fine, but that person can hold on to that hero forever if they want to just play really safe. For you to get your hands on a hero, you need to snowball really fast early on to get enough points, or you need to get lucky by spawning or dying the moment another hero dies so that you can then click on them really fast and then load in. There's simply no mechanism in place to share the heroes around more fairly, and the result is that more often than not, you'll have enough points to buy a hero, you'll sit on those points for the entire round waiting for your next opportunity, and then the round will just end. Not great. I suppose the biggest question though, and the most important question that you're probably asking yourself is there any real substance to the multiplayer? And I'll have to be honest and say that no, there isn't, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Battlefront isn't about bullet drop or epic skill-based 1v1s or strategic positioning or teamwork or whatever. It's just wave-based arcade free-for-all. It's just meant to be mindless fun for kids and adults alike, but I suspect more so for kids given the current simplicity of this game. Were it not for the microtransactions, I'd be glad that a game like this existed just to let me blow off steam and immerse myself in the sights and sounds of a really authentically recreated Star Wars universe. I'm actually totally fine with that, in fact. If you want to judge Battlefront 2's multiplayer gameplay on what it's trying to be, then we have to call it a success in most areas. And if you're going to ask me, is this game fun? I'd say absolutely yes, because I've had a lot of fun playing this game, there's no doubt about that. But all of that is really for naught when we begin to look at the progression system and monetization system that has been overlaid on top of this very worthwhile game. You might think I'm talking about loot boxes here, and I am, but I'm actually talking about something far broader than just monetization that has affected not only this game, but games like Destiny or The Division even. It's now time to talk about Battlefront 2's cardinal weakness, the monetization of its broken RPG systems. I got my start on YouTube covering The Division, a third-person looter shooter that had a strong PvE focus, but also had a PvP endgame centered around the Dark Zone, which was essentially a free-for-all arena where anyone could shoot anyone else. In the decades to come, developers will look back and still talk about the learnings gained from the Dark Zone, because it was the first time that an open-form PvP environment was available in a AAA game, and the results were extremely mixed. Some loved its unpredictable dog-eat-dog harshness, while others hated the fact that a significant portion of the experience was gangs of people in the endgame roaming around in the DZ looking for helpless people to gank for no other reason than because they can. Part of the frustration felt by many was that there was a strength in numbers factor associated with the ganking, but part of it was the gear advantage that could be obtained and brought into the PvP environment. Think back to your favorite ever PvP experiences like GoldenEye or Halo 2 or Quake 3 or Rocket League or whatever. Now imagine if the people you were playing against were twice as strong or as fast as you because they'd invested hundreds of hours to grind better gear and loadouts. It's great fun for the people that have the time because they get to live that power fantasy that video games is all about. They get to feel super strong and that they can take on the world. But for those without the time to endlessly grind, it's not fun for those people. They feel like bugs getting squished underneath someone's boot, and they typically just end up quitting in frustration. When it comes to competitive environments, RPG systems are always the antithesis of competitiveness. Imagine if Ronaldo could just put on a special pair of boots that could make him run faster than the opposition. Or if Federer had a special racket that increased his serve speed by 20%. Would you watch that sport? Natural ability and skill are what we look for when we watch and participate in competitive environments, because there's virtue in actual greatness rather than the sort of greatness that can be purchased or gamed. This is a core tenet of PvP video games. If you want to be truly competitive, you have to remove the RPG equation that results in people being overpowered, either due to their stats or because they just happen to equip the rock that counters your scissors. The Division never learned this lesson and has suffered for it ever since launch at the hands of a collapsed player base that hated the DZ experience. Destiny 2 did learn this lesson, funnily enough, and significantly reduced the impact of its RPG stats in its PvP game by neutering the power of its weapons. But in the case of Destiny 2, it didn't separate the PvP nerfs from the PvE nerfs. So now you have this PvE endgame where it's entirely boring and all the weapons are hollow and vacuous and meaningless and there's nothing to grind for and no one really likes it anymore. Getting the RPG right in a game is hard, and Star Wars Battlefront II has done the most spectacular job of getting it completely wrong here. The system works like this. You have abilities and base stats per character or vehicle or hero. You can buy or earn loot crates that give you random cards. These cards improve both the power of your abilities and your base stats. So it sounds really simple until you start looking at just how much bonus power is being provided by these cards. In the case of the ship upgrades, a fully upgraded X-Wing can have 20% extra health, do 20% more damage, and have 40% more damage on its proton torpedo ability. You are more than a fifth stronger than your opponent in that setting, so if the two of you fly straight towards each other and you start firing, you are going to win simply because you spent more money or more time to get better stats. There are examples like this for every class, every hero, every vehicle, and it's all awful because it all cheapens individual skill. Many have tried to defend this, saying that true skill trumps stats advantage, but that is such a false economy of choice. A player base should never need to make those sorts of excuses in a game. It should respect the spirit of competitive play enough not to fill it with this rubbish in the first place. When two equally skilled opponents meet on the battlefield, the determining factor should never be who has invested more hours or dollars to unlock the stats required to be better. That just sucks. And all of this is made infinitely worse by the economic balancing. Progression in this game is laughably slow, criminally slow, mobile game slow, and it's been tuned this way so you're forced to spend money on loot boxes, which are the core progression of this game. One Redditor calculated it would take over 4,000 hours to fully max out your star cards, or you could spend $2,100 on loot boxes to get the same result. It's crappy playing with a class knowing that you will take hundreds of hours or hundreds of dollars to reach the final form of that class. At that point, you're just going to not bother because you know that the goal is so far beyond your reach that you may as well not try. The short-term impact of this system is that it is pay to win because those who choose to spend immediately become better. And for those who don't spend, they immediately feel constantly disadvantaged. But it's actually the long-term impacts of this model that pose the greatest threat. 6 or 12 months into the life of the game, and please, if you are watching this review 6 or 12 months after this game has released, please pay attention to this bit. You new players are going to be going up against veterans who have grinded out significant progress towards completing their fully stacked loadouts. And you out there, you new players, will find yourself at a constant disadvantage. For new players, the pressure to spend will be all the more alluring, simply so they can catch up and have a fighting chance. I could make an entire video on this topic, and I sort of have, to be honest. On this channel, I've got the Wilson Lootbox video, which details how EA have been deeply leveraged into the pay-to-win model since as early as 2009. And on my other channel, Layman Gaming, I've made in excess of 10 videos now, highlighting why Star Wars Battlefront II is in fact the most dangerous game of 2017. Because if it is allowed to succeed, it will usher in a new era of predatory monetization from all publishers that will forever ruin AAA games. I won't repeat the reason behind all of this here, I'll just say this. This progression system is so bad that it literally stops me from using other classes because the opportunity cost of doing so is just too high. The system is terrible even before you monetize it, because it puts bonus power stats where they don't belong, and it ramps up the grinds towards those stats to absurd levels. It is, on every level, a categorical failure, and it is the undoing of this game. But there is a silver lining in all of this. For a long time now, many have attempted to defend exploitative and predatory monetization practices in video games by arguing that they don't affect you if you choose not to buy them. And the most incontrovertible proof of this fallacy is Star Wars Battlefront II. It is the game that shook us into awakening because it showed us how a game can be top to bottom ruined by greed. There is a stench that hangs over this game. It's staring at you in the login screen. It tugs at you whenever you lose a 1v1 encounter and you wonder whether or not that outcome was determined by pay to win rather than by skill. It taunts you as you sit at the character selection screen wanting to play as Luke Skywalker, but you can't because you haven't grinded enough or spent enough. It chastens you as you dare to think about using a different class when you respawn because you know that you haven't put 100 hours or $100 into that class to level it up. It mocks you as you scroll through the progression menus, as you inevitably realize how little of it you are ever going to have, no matter how much you play. And more than anything else, it just saddens you to think of what this game could have been had EA not completely destroyed it with their calculated, surgically precise interventions. Microtransactions are the dialysis machine hooked straight into the veins of Star Wars Battlefront 2. But what should be giving the title a sustainable, long-term revenue stream to facilitate the future of this game is in fact completely poisoning it. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is dead on arrival, and my only hope now is that either EA changes its ways or that they lose the exclusive rights to this license. I want to play Star Wars games with my kids one day, and I would never ever show them this sort of EA Star Wars game. I want to finish this review by saying something to DICE, the people who made this game, and also Criterion and Motive who helped out. I want to say that you guys did a really good job. And I'm sure it's been extremely difficult for your studio to suffer through this, because I'm sure none of you grew up playing games and loving Star Wars, And you didn't work years and years on this game to have it come out with this sort of reception. I don't know the details, but I'm almost certain that it was not your designs that led to the disaster that we're seeing here. And I'm sure all the best parts of it were the result of everything that you poured into it, and all the worst parts were things that you fought against throughout that development cycle. My hope is that EA listens to you guys more in future and allows you to create the games that you are so clearly capable of creating, because I do think that you're an incredibly valuable asset to the gaming community, and the more and more your ability is stifled by the likes of all of this rubbish, then the worse off we all are. So thank you very much, and all the best. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you'd like to help me make more of this sort of video, then you might want to consider checking out my Patreon page, but like and a subscribe would be more than enough support. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.